All right, and we're back, and it's COMP305. It's week 9, lesson 9, part 2. We just finished off making a simple animation for our aim. Let's take a look and see what we've got here. So again, just to follow up, we've got this aim animation. When I right click, kind of brings that weird aiming thing up. You know, there's different ones you can make. You know, our gun looks pretty good, and now we need to get that firing animation in place. And it takes a little bit of doing. Okay, let's talk about this in a second. So how do we do this thing? Remember, what we're trying to do is we've got our firing animation. That's what we've done. And I need to create another script for me to use. And where would you think the best place for that script would be? If I was going to make another script, it's not going to be the player, right? Because the player moves this around and stuff. So where would I want to put that script that's going to fire the weapon, right? And I want to be able to do a couple things. I want to have something called a muzzle flash, right? Which is one thing. So that muzzle flash particle, I want to play that muzzle flash. And I also want to, you know, make the gun fire, right? So that's one thing I need to make as well. So how do I do that? And where would I put it, by the way? Any clue? Where would I put this animation, the script? Should I put it on the player camera? Should I put it on the gun camera? Should I put it on the rifle? What should I put it on? What do you think? On the way it's looking like right now. Come on, take a guess. It's okay.
The gun camera.
You got it, gun camera. The reason why you wouldn't put it on the player camera is because player camera is a little bit separate. The gun camera has everything to do with the gun. Remember, it's in the gun layer. That's why it's rendered. And if you notice the gun camera, if I look to the scene, all it sees is the gun, right? Look at, here's the particle system. You can see the particle system now again. All right, so the particle system looks like a bunch of throwing stars, right? Shuriken. That's right, the ninja stars. The shuriken particle system, right? And if I look at the player camera, all it sees is the environment, but not the gun, because we've kind of excluded that. So we want to put everything to do with the gun in the gun camera. Okay, so that's where we're going to put our script. So let's first make a script. So I'm going to go right click here. I'm going to make a new C# script, right? And what I want to call this thing is player shooting. So it's a player shooting script. That's what it is. I want to kind of move this script by drag and dropping it onto the gun camera. So I'm going to right click or left click and drag and drop it onto the gun camera. So now my gun camera has this player shooting script. There it is. Okay. In order for me to modify this, of course, I'm going to double click, right? And we're going to start off with some of our dependencies. So remember that we want to include things like references to our muzzle flash. And again, all I'm doing is making a player shooting script that I'm adding to the gun camera right now. Okay, right now it's just a kind of a bare bones thing, right? I'm also going to use both update and fixed update, right? So we're going to talk about this, and I want to get you guys to answer the question: why would I need both, right? Update and fixed update. One for my physics and one for my other stuff in my scene, right? So that's what I want. So my physics, this will be where all my physics stuff happens. So physics effects. So things like my gun flash, my muzzle flash, things like, not my muzzle flash, my things like my impact particle system and all that stuff's going to happen here. My gun flash can happen here because there's no physics involved in the impacts or the muzzle flash. I mean, okay, so let's go through here. So I need there's some dependencies I need, and let's start writing them in, right? So in my player shooting script, one thing I need is access to a public particle system. This is the first time we've actually used a particle system. So a public particle system that we're going to call muzzle flash. Right, so that's where our muzzle flash, we have to make a reference to the muzzle flash particle system that we're going to use. And we're going to use that generic muzzle flash that we kind of included. The other one we need is access to a generic game object. This is interesting. We're going to do this a little differently. Called, it's going to be an impact, right? So we're going to call it an impact, right? And this impact is going to be the impact that we're going to use, which is going to be this concrete impact that we're going to use. Okay, so that's two things that are going to be exposed on the. And these are public instance variables variables, and these are exposed on the inspector, right? So these are things to note. So public instance variables exposed on the inspector, and what we're going to do here is we're going to include some other private ones that are not. Okay. One of the other ones I want that's also exposed is a public animator. We're going to kind of get the animator again because we want to have access to the animator that's part of our rifle animator, right? So we're going to call this rifle animator, right? So we want to kind of drag and drop into our rifle animator these, kind of a reference to the animation. So we can do that gunfire animation. We have to have access to that as well. Okay, so that's another one we have to have into our public. Then there are going to be some private instance variables that are not exposed, right? And again, I could, if I wanted to use, I could expose them by serializing the field, right? But I'm not going to because I don't need to. So private instance variables, and one of them is going to be called, it's going to be, and you guys are going to hate me, an array of game objects, right? And you haven't seen this before, called impacts, right? Now remember, this is going to be private, right? And what I want to do is mark it as such. So an array of game objects. And we're going to see how this works out. So what's an array of game objects? It means like a number of slots, a bunch of elements that include game objects. People hate arrays because they're really challenging to work with and understand, especially when they're using other objects, an object array, right? Okay, I also need to know, we want to iterate through this game object array somehow. We're going to use something called different ways of using a current impact. So the current impact is going to start off at 0. So it's the first impact, the first object in the game object array. We're going to start it off at 0. That's just our placeholder for that, right? And the other one is we want to have something called max impacts, right? Max impacts, which are going to be 5. And the reason why we're setting this up, by the way, these are private, so we have to change the naming convention a little bit. Max impacts, and we also want something called current impact, right? We're going to make the underscore there just because we're using that convention, the underscore convention. Oops. Okay, so these are kind of our prerequisites. We also have another variable that we're going to use, a private Boolean variable that we're going to use called shooting. So shooting, we're going to start it off as false. So by default, the gun is not shooting. That's what it means. Okay. All right. Cool. So this is where we start off and get some hairy stuff going on. So in my start method, when we instantiate my gun camera for the first time, right? We're going to say, well, this dot underscore impacts then, right? Which remember, impacts is a game object array, is equal to new game object array, right, with a size of, I'm going to instantiate it from by default, of this dot underscore, I can type, max impacts. So we're only going to have up to 5 elements in the array. So what am I doing here? Why am I making an array? This is something we haven't done before. And then we need little for loops. We're going to say for, we're going to say something like this, int impact count, right? Impact count is equal to 0. So that's the first impact, right? Where impact count, right, is less than this dot underscore max impacts, then what we want to say is impact count plus plus, just like we normally impact count. Oh God, plus plus. I'm getting tired already. All right, and what we want in there is, that's probably right, I did. We want to say that this dot underscore impacts impact count, right, then is equal to something like, I want to instantiate, right, instantiate my impact, this dot impact, which is the one that I'm getting a reference to from the inspector. So for the actual impact particle system, that's what that is, right? And just to be safe, because sometimes Unity will give us a bit of an error, we want to make sure that this is cast to a game object. Okay. So that's what this does. So what am I doing here? I'm actually creating something called an object pool, right? I'm creating a number of objects in the object pool, and I'm going to reuse 5 of these impacts over and over again. I'm not going to instantiate an unlimited number of impacts. You only have a few. I'm just going to cycle right through them. And why? I'm actually pre-allocating our memory. This is when I'm using these impacts, right? So that way I don't have to instantiate and destroy objects, over and over again. I'm only going to do this one time, right? I'm never actually going to destroy the impact. I'm going to play the impact, the animation for the impact. I'm going to play that burst for that particular particle system, and then it's going to go away, and then I'm going to position it in the next position from the object pool, right? Which is kind of a cool little effect. It's almost like how we did in our 2D game where we reset the object off screen, right? In this case, we're not really resetting off screen. We're letting the emitter play, right? This particle system play and end, and then we're playing it again, but just in another location. And we only have 5 of them that we're just using over and over again. Okay, so that's what this does. This thing does. Okay, cool. Okay, in our update now, I want to do this. Here's my my pseudocode, right? When my left button is clicked, right? I want to play the muzzle flash, right? And I want to set the animator, right? Because my animator for my fire is a trigger. I want to set the trigger to fire, right? And I want to set my shooting Boolean value to true, that I'm shooting, right? Okay, that's what I want to do. So those are the things. So, play muzzle flash and shoot impact, or shoot impact as an example, when left mouse button is pressed. That's what I want to do. Okay, so how do I do that? So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say if, oh man, I don't have access to my Crossplatform Input Manager anymore. How come? Well, because it's not included in here. And if you notice in my first-person controller, the way I access it is I use these using statements to include the namespace for both my Cross-Platform Input Manager plus the utility methods, which I might as well copy here and include in my player shooting script. All right, these are 2 using statements that allow me to use the cross-platform input from the that we've got from our generic standard asset for character controller. Right. Now that I've got a reference to them in the namespace, I can access them. I can say something like this again. I can say if cross-platform input manager dot get button, and I may want to use a get button down here. We'll try the get button, and it's going to be fire 1, right? So the first mouse button. If that's true, then what do I want to do? Well, let's first test to see if this works. So, and we'll make it so it's get button down, right? So what's the difference between get button down and get button? Anybody? Think about this from a web perspective. It's kind of the same thing. If I get button down, there's also get button up. Get button up means that I let go of the mouse button. When I let go of the mouse button, it also produces a trigger, an event to fire, right? If I click the mouse button down for the first time, it also creates an event to trigger, right? So both events can happen, right? And there's also get button. Button is a click. Anytime I click the button, it'll trigger, right? It's not when the mouse button is down, but if I click the button, whether I click it or not, it triggers. So there's different reasons to use these things, and one of them is get button down. Kind of waits to see if my mouse button's firing, kind of pressing down, I'm firing. All right, so I want to kind of test this out. So I want to do a debug.log just to test that it's working, and I'll say left mouse button clicked. That's what I want to do, right? So we'll test it out in the script. All right, so let's do some preliminary stuff here. First, I want to click on my gun camera, and I notice that I've got my muzzle flash. It needs something for me to drag in here, my muzzle flash. And I do have that. It's called muzzle flash generic. So if I take the generic muzzle flash and drag and drop it in here, it creates a reference. I got to do the same thing for my impact. So I'm going to take my concrete flex, that's my impact, and drag and drop it into my impact. There we go. And then I have my rifle animator, and of course I got my AK rifle for that, so I'm going to drag and drop that in there too. Here we go. So I've got my rifle animator, my concrete flex, that's the prefab for my impact, right? And I got my muzzle flash particle system that I'm going to be using. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to save the scene. I'll save my project. Okay, and now let's test it out to see if it works. I'm going to press play. All right, and if I right mouse button, it kind of moves it in, so it keeps the aiming. And if I left mouse button, I get that left mouse button click. So that's good. And let me just stop. So my left mouse button now works. Notice I only got one click, not numerous clicks like I got for my right mouse button. Because this time I'm using left mouse button down, or mouse button down, as opposed to button, kind of the get button. Get button down is a little bit different. Okay, this is good. So I've got access to my button. And again, this is the problem. Some people have this thing where they want to do a large amount of build without testing, right, for their game. And the problem they run into, and they say, I talked to this student today, she said, so I kind of get it. I can watch you and do it as I watch, right? But when I go and do it on my own, I got to run into all these problems, and I can't get anything done, right? I can't build something. And my answer to her, and my answer to you guys, and people who are online as well, is do an incremental build. Don't try and build, too much all at once, and test often. Like right now, I just tested it. I kind of did this debug, and I said, can I click my left mouse button? Because if I can't click my left mouse button, it doesn't matter how many my other algorithm is, it won't work, right? Because my left mouse button isn't triggering. So it's really important to kind of test in small chunks, and then incrementally build, almost like I'm building a sandcastle, right? First, you build the base of the sandcastle. Then you take some sand and put it inside the bucket. Then you put some water in the bucket to make sure that the sand is something you can pack with. And then you put the first tower, and you make one tower at a time, building the wall nice and carefully until the whole sandcastle is built around you, right? If you try and build all of it together, it's too much, right? And some of it will collapse, right? And the same thing goes here. You can't build a sandcastle from right away from scratch. It takes effort. It's an incremental build, just like a house. It's an incremental build. Same thing with a program, especially on the game. Games are the hardest things to build, and you got to slowly build them and test them lots as you go. Otherwise, you don't know where the error is. There'll be too many errors to fix, and you'll be like lost. I don't know what to do next. Where do I start? How do I correct this stuff? Okay. So this is the first piece. So I know that my left mouse button is moving and grooving. That means I can go back to my script now and replace this debug.log with some real code, right? That does something. And the first thing I want to try and do is, before I do my fire trigger, is I want to do two things. I want to say this._shooting, right, is equal to true. So I want to kind of set this to true. Because now we know when we're in here, if I click my left mouse button, I'm shooting. Okay? That's one. And the second thing is I want to set my muzzle flash to play. So when I click my muzzle flash, it'll play the muzzle flash. Let's try this out. So we'll say muzzle flash dot play, and we know it works because the reason why the play works is because you have several different methods. Let me take a look for particle systems. Let's look and see all the methods. Clear, compare tag, duration, emission rate. You can modify a bunch of different properties of the particle system here. As an example, if you see, right, is alive, is paused, is playing. You can check, you can loop it. You can pause and play, which is what I want to do, right? And you can also stop it, right? So I want to play the particle system. There it is. And I want to check this up first. So it's going to play, and I want to make sure that it plays no matter where I point my mouse. Let's check this out. So it's the next iteration, the next iterative build. All right, good. So let's try this out. So I'll right click or play, and now when I move around my camera, right, and if I click, I get a flash. Take a look. Bam, 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 right? So now my muzzle flash is working, and no matter where I go, right, it looks like I'm firing my gun. There's a bit of smoke. It's kind of cool, right? See how the smoke is going? So the smoke is working, and that's the particle effect that's following me around, and the spawn point is the front of my rifle, right? That's the most important thing. Notice how when my mouse goes off the screen here, that I can't do it, and this is just simulation, of course. in this simulation mode, right? There we go. Okay, so my mouse look algorithm. Okay, cool. So we got my muzzle flash works. That's a great thing. We couldn't get that working earlier. By the way, for those people who were here in the first class, the reason why it didn't work is there were scripts. If you noticed earlier, I removed some scripts from both my muzzle flash and from my concrete flex. You need to move those. There's some scripts that by default are attached to them, and that's what I've done. I removed them in order for us to move forward. Okay, cool. So I've got my muzzle flash. Whenever I press the button, it does that. Now I want to play my animation, and I've already preset that up, right? So I want to kind of go to my animation to trigger it, right? So here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to say, well, I'm also going to say this dot rifle animator dot trigger, set trigger for the fire animation, right? I'm going to set that trigger so that whenever I click the button, it's going to set my rifle to shake. Okay, so that's the next piece I want to add in. That's the next incremental piece. I'm adding one thing at a time. All right, let's check this out and see if that works. I'm going to save my scene, and I'm going to try and play this. So whenever I click the mouse button now, I should see two things: my muzzle flash, right, and my trigger for the gun. So bam, take a look. Bam, 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 right? Okay, so that's cool, right? So I got my gun firing, right? So it kind of goes like this, and if I go here, what if I go here and press the kind of left mouse button, or my control key, it can fire as well, right? Bang, 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 right? So it fires from here as well. So I can aim and fire, right? And or I can press my button to trigger the fire. Okay, and that's how it is. So kind of like a little bit of an effect. So it looks like it's firing. I still don't quite like the the movie clip I played. I actually made a better one for the other class. And it was less up motion. This is a little bit too much motion upwards, but it's kind of makes it so that the rifle is kind of like it gives you a bit of a kickback. That's what this thing is, right? So again, if now it kicks back, no matter where I play. Now there's no sound attached to this thing. It just plays the muzzle flash and the animation, right? Okay. Arg. So that's part two. So we kind of made that first part. First part is, again, we play the muzzle flash, and this one plays the animation effect for the trigger. Right, so when I click the trigger, it shoots. Okay. And if you notice, if I stop playing, so if I don't play anymore, I would just do this one piece, right? My get button down. How about when I want to check to see when I'm not firing, right? Because when I'm not firing, it should kind of turn off the firing sequence, right? Or else I'm always going to be firing, and I don't want that. I'm always going to be shooting. Well, there's a great thing we can do. We can say one of these. We can say if in the same sequence, right? Crossplatform Input Manager .get button up, right? For the same button, if this button comes up, fire one, then we know that we're not firing anymore, right? And let's make sure that there's enough brackets here so we don't get the error. We know we're not firing anymore, so we're going to say this ._ shooting is equal to false. So we know that that's true, right? So we know we're not shooting anymore when the mouse button is up, right? Because otherwise it'll continue sometimes to shoot and to do things even though this mouse button is up. All right, so that's kind of a safeguard. We may not need that later on. Let's go back in here and try it out. So we're going to kind of move, and then we'll move our mouse around, and then bang. So we're going to do this, and then when we shoot, and I can notice that I can continue to fire. And then there's a couple things I don't like. See how that doesn't quite move fast enough for me. And I think what I can do is I can adjust the animation just a touch, right? So that it's a little better. So I'm going to go back to my animator here. And I'm going to go from my gunfire, from idle to my gunfire, right? So let's check what that looks like. So if I click the button, how fast does it move to gunfire? Bam. It's actually a little slow. It's a little slow on the way back down. So I want to make it a little bit faster. So again, if I click on this, right, depending on what I'm clicking on here, notice that this is the transition. I can tighten up this transition by pulling this piece here and here to make it tighter on the way out, like the way towards the fire. And the same thing, I can tighten this up a little bit more on the way back so that it's the transition, the blend mode from gunfire. Notice there's two modes here. There's gunfire mode and gun idle, and then on the other way, there's gun idle to gunfire. there shouldn't be a big transition here. The longer the transition, it looks too quick. It looks too long, right? So let's try and play this to see what the difference is. So if I click, now it's a much sharper, right? So it's like, it's bang, just a little bit of a up and down, but it goes back right immediately. It doesn't sway too much. Now it looks like, again, we're a little bit closer to what it looks like. Get a bit of a smoke. It's kind of like a lot of smoke for this thing, for this gun, eh? It's crazy smoke, right? Whenever we launch, right? Watch what? Bang, 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 right? So big kind of firing mechanism. Okay, cool. So we got that. We tightened up the animation just a little bit, and that's the one piece. Now let's add some basic sounds. Whenever I click the button to fire, I want to make a sound, right? How do I do that? So again, I got some sounds, so I'm going to go into my imported assets. We still haven't done the impacts or anything like that. The only thing we have right now is the one piece. Let's go to my imported assets for some of my sounds. And where are they going to go? You have to ask yourself too, right? I want my gun sound, my gun fire sound to be on my rifle, right? That's where it's got to be, right? So my rifle itself, whenever I click the button to fire the rifle, it's going to be there. That's my prop, right? So, I mean, again, you can put it anywhere you want. It makes some more sense like that for me. So I'm going to go to FPS effects, and I'm going to go to sounds. And if you notice, there's some sounds for explosions. And there's also this MP5 fire sound. Let's take a look and see what that sounds like, right? So that's what it's going to sound like, right? That's pretty good. It's a pretty good sound. So I want that sound on my rifle. So I'm going to click on my rifle. Here's my AK rifle. And I'm just going to drag and drop that sound into the rifle. So I'm going to kind of go like one of these, put it in. So there's my audio source. But I don't want to play on awake. I only want to play when I click the button, right? So, and I got to make a reference to this audio source in order for me to play it, because I can't play the audio source unless I make a reference to it. And it's going to happen on the gun camera. So the gun camera's got to have a reference to the rifle in order for me to play my sound, right? And this is going to be called the bullet fire sound, right? That's what it's going to be. So let's go back in here into my monodevelop. And first, I need a public reference to this audio source. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say public audio source, right? And we're going to call this bullet fire sound, the bullet fire sound, right? And it's public, so that's okay. That's good. And what I want to do is once I've made the reference, might as well get in here and drag and drop some kind of reference to it, right? So I've saved it, and if you notice now there's a space for audio source. I'm going to take my rifle that has the bullet fire sound already attached to it, and I'm going to drag and drop it into that space. And it's only going to take the audio source now from that rifle as opposed to the animator, right? It's only going to look for the one that I'm looking for, so audio source, right? I can look for transform. I can do a bunch of different things to connect to it, right? Okay, cool. So I've got my bullet fire sound, and now I want to play it. How do I do that? We did it before in 2D, right? So whenever I click the button, on button down, I want to make that that play sound, right? So how do I do that? I'll put it here with my muzzle flash. I'll say this dot bullet fire sound dot play, right? So that's my bullet fire sound. It's going to play now, and let's launch that and see how it works. So again, incremental steps, small steps, one step at a time. And let's play this now and see what it works. All right, ready? That's pretty good, right? So let's move that to the middle, right? So I can move it in there. So realistic, right? So if I move up here, bang, 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 bang. Right, pretty good. So that's a pretty good sound. If I press my control button, it also works. But if I hold it down, either one, it doesn't continue to play. It's only one time, right? Which is a good thing. If I press both at the same time, that's a problem, right? We could probably fix that. It's kind of a bug, both playing at the same time. But that's really what it does. If I kind of focus in on here and press my control button, so I can kind of aim and fire. And maybe one of the things that I noticed, see that animation's got to be fixed too on the way out, is to still try to play that animation even though I was in my zoom mode, if you will. One thing to note is this, that in the real world game, and I talked about this in today's class, if I'm firing, right, I don't have perfect aim, right? Especially if I'm firing from the hip, like this is right here. If I'm holding the gun here and I'm firing the gun right in here, right? I'm firing from the hip. There's nothing really, I shouldn't get a perfect firing mechanism right here, right? If I aim and then fire, I should get a better thing. But even when I'm aiming, depending on how far away the aim is, as an example, right? I should still get a bit of a drift. That's all programming, right? I'm not going to do that here in this class. This is a little bit out of scope for so much detail for the gun itself, right? Remember, it's not like I can kind of stand up and no matter where I shoot, it's perfect aim, right? It's not going to happen in kind of a realistic, more of a realistic kind of type of game where you have a bit of drift, right? I know I was talking to Max today, and if you're playing a game like CS:GO or CS 1.6 or whatever, right? There is no aiming. You just fire, and either you hit or you don't, kind of thing, right? And in some games where you do have some kind of aiming control, like whatever it is, you want to make sure that when you aim, it gives you better chances for the player to hit. Like for example, in a sniper kind of game, right? Our game, just fire, it's going to hit automatically. The aiming is just for effect, just as a prop. If you wanna, you can make it so that if you aim, you do more damage. It's up to you in your game what you want to do, or maybe you don't even have an aiming mechanism at all, right? Just fire. Okay, so the sound looks good. The next piece that we're going to get into, and I think what I want to do is wait for it for tomorrow to come into play, is to get this next piece to do some ray casting, and some ray casting for us to fire. Because remember, we're not going to really fire our gun. Our gun is just a prop. It makes it look like we're firing a weapon. But truly, what's happening is this piece in here, this reticule, is where the firing mechanism is going to come into play. And this is where all the mechanics are going to come in. So I'm not going to start it now. It's like kind of 4 minutes until the end of class. Let's end it today. And then tomorrow, we'll complete the game. We'll add in some simple objects to destroy, right? We'll add in some, that's tomorrow, by the way, at 4:30, right? 4:30 to 6:30. We'll add in some scoring. We'll get a score going on, right? So we'll kind of complete our game, our first level, as much as we can, right? So that by the next week, we can get into the second level and we can create our terrain with trees and grass and all that kind of stuff, and maybe a bit of a wind, right? So that way we can see what that looks like. Eventually, what I'd like to try and get into is some, third-person kind of enemies that come at you, like zombies or whatever, right? That kind of come at you, and you're going to try and kill the zombies, right? That's the idea, right, with this game. They want to wander around. Maybe I'll get even some procedural map generation. Like right now, I just put my tiles in here. And even for this level, all I'm doing is I'm generating tiles in the hierarchy. And what I want to do eventually is each of these tiles are going to be generated randomly as opposed to the way it's done right now. Any questions around this stuff? Again, pretty straightforward. We're following the pattern. And one thing I want you to remember is, if you can take anything away from today's session, is incremental build. Don't do everything at once. One of my colleagues used to say it like this. He was an artist, an animator, and he said, don't bite off more than you can chew. He would always say that all the time. Like, don't try and draw the perfect scene. You can't do that at once. You have to draw your environment slowly. Same thing with us. We have to program we have to eat our problem in chunks. We have a big problem to take care of. We have to make the scene work. But we can't make the scene work all at once. We have to chunk it down so we can eat it. We have this big elephant in the room. We want to eat the whole elephant, but we can't eat him all at once because we're gonna choke, right? So we're going to have to cut them into pieces in order for us to eat the elephant. Okay? Anyways, that's it for me. We'll get together next day and we'll do the next piece. And I'll upload everything else I got here to GitHub for those people who are watching.